half an hour at Madame Tussaud's, where she saw several dusty wax effigies of members of the royal family. She told Bessie that if she wished to go to the Tower she must get someone else to take her. Bessie expressed hereupon an earnest disposition to go alone, but upon this proposal as well Mrs. Westgate sprinkled cold water. "Remember," she said, "that you are not in your innocent little Boston. It is not a question of walking up and down Beacon Street." Then she went on to explain that there were two classes of American girls in Europe, those that walked about alone and those that did not. "You happen to belong, my dear," she said to her sister, "to the class that does not." "It is only," answered Bessie, laughing, "because you happen to prevent me." And she devoted much private meditation to this question of effecting a visit to the Tower of London. Suddenly it seemed as if the problem might be solved. The two ladies at Jones's Hotel received a visit from Willie Woodley. Such was the social appellation of a young American who had sailed from New York a few days after their own departure, and who, having the privilege of intimacy with them in that city, had lost no time, on his arrival in London, in coming to pay them his respects. He had, in fact, gone to see them directly after going to see his tailor, than which there can be no greater exhibition of promptitude on the part of a young American who has just alighted at the Charing Cross Hotel. He was a slim, pale youth, of the most amiable disposition, famous for the skill with which he led the German in New York. Indeed, by the young ladies who habitually figured in this terpsichorean revel, he was believed to be the best dancer in the world. It was in these terms that he was always spoken of, and that his identity was indicated. He was the gentlest, softest young man it was possible to meet. He was beautifully dressed, in the English style, and he knew an immense deal about London. He had been at Newport during the previous summer, at the time of our young Englishman's visit, and he took extreme pleasure in the society of Bessie Alden, whom he always addressed as Miss Bessie. She immediately arranged with him, in the presence of her sister, that he should conduct her to the scene of Anne Boleyn's execution. "You may do as you please," said Mrs. Westgate. "Only, if you desire the information, it is not the custom here for young ladies to knock about London with young men." "Miss Bessie has waltzed with me so often," observed Willie Woodley. "She can surely go out with me in a hansom." "I consider waltzing," said Mrs. Westgate, "the most innocent pleasure of our time." "It's a compliment to our time," exclaimed the young man, with a little laugh in spite of himself. "I don't see why I should regard what is done here," said Bessie Alden. "Why should I suffer the restrictions of a society of which I enjoy none of the privileges?" "That's very good, murmured Willie Woodley. "Oh, go to the Tower and feel the axe if you like," said Mrs. Westgate. "I consent to your going with Mr. Woodley, but I should not let you go with an Englishman." "Miss Bessie wouldn't care to go with an Englishman," Mr. Woodley declared with a faint asperity that was, perhaps, not unnatural in a young man who, dressing in the manner that I have indicated and knowing a great deal, as I have said, about London, saw no reason for drawing these sharp distinctions. He agreed upon a day with Miss Bessie, a day of that same week. An ingenious mind might, perhaps, trace a connection between the young girl's allusion to her destitution of social privileges and a question she asked on the morrow as she sat with her sister at lunch. "Don't you mean to write to anyone?" said Bessie. "I wrote this morning to Captain Littledale," Mrs. Westgate replied. "But Mr. Woodley said that Captain Littledale had gone to India." "He said he thought he had heard so. He knew nothing about it." For a moment Bessie Alden said nothing more. Then, at last, "And don't you intend to write to Mr. Beaumont?" she inquired. "You mean to Lord Lambeth," said her sister. "I said Mr. Beaumont because he was so good a friend of yours." Mrs. Westgate looked at the young girl with sisterly candor. "I don't care two straws for Mr. Beaumont." "You were certainly very nice to him." "I am nice to everyone," said Mrs. Westgate simply. "To everyone but me," rejoined Bessie, smiling. Her sister continued to look at her. Then, at last, "Are you in love with Lord Lambeth?" she asked. The young girl stared a moment, and the question was apparently too humorous even to make her blush. "Not that I know of," she answered. "Because if you are," Mrs. Westgate went on, "I shall certainly not send for him." "That proves what I said," declared Bessie, smiling, "that you are not nice to me." "It would be a poor service, my dear child," said her sister. "In what sense? There is nothing against Lord Lambeth that I know of." Mrs. Westgate was silent a moment. "You are in love with him, then?" Bessie stared again, but this time she blushed a little. "Ah, if you won't be serious," she answered, "we will not mention him again." For some moments Lord Lambeth was not mentioned again, and it was Mrs. Westgate who, at the end of this period, reverted to him. "Of course I will let him know we are here, because I think he would be hurt, justly enough, if we should go away without seeing him. It is fair to give him a chance to come and thank me for the kindness we showed him. But I don't want to seem eager." "Neither do I," said Bessie with a little laugh. "Though I confess," added her sister, "that I am curious to see how he will behave." "He behaved very well at Newport." "Newport is not London. At Newport he could do as he liked, but here it is another affair. He has to have an eye to consequences." "If he had more freedom, then, at Newport," argued Bessie, "it is the more to his credit that he behaved well; and if he has to be so careful here, it is possible he will behave even better." "Better, better?" repeated her sister. "My dear child, what is your point of view?" "How do you mean, my point of view?" "Don't you care for Lord Lambeth a little?" This time Bessie Alden was displeased. She slowly got up from the table, turning her face away from her sister. "You will oblige me by not talking so," she said. Mrs. Westgate sat watching her for some moments as she moved slowly about the room and went and stood at the window. "I will write to him this afternoon," she said at last. "Do as you please," Bessie answered, and presently she turned round. "I am not afraid to say that I like Lord Lambeth. I like him very much." "He is not clever," Mrs. Westgate declared. "Well, there have been clever people whom I have disliked," said Bessie Alden, "so that I suppose I may like a stupid one. Besides, Lord Lambeth is not stupid." "Not so stupid as he looks," exclaimed her sister, smiling. "If I were in love with Lord Lambeth, as you said just now, it would be bad policy on your part to abuse him." "My dear child, don't give me lessons in policy," cried Mrs. Westgate. "The policy I mean to follow is very deep." The young girl began to walk about the room again. Then she stopped before her sister. "I have never heard in the course of 5 minutes," she said, "so many hints and innuendos. I wish you would tell me in plain English what you mean." "I mean that you may be much annoyed." "That is still only a hint," said Bessie. Her sister looked at her, hesitating an instant. "It will be said of you that you have come after Lord Lambeth, that you followed him." Bessie Alden threw back her pretty head like a startled hind, and a look flashed into her face that made Mrs. Westgate rise from her chair. "Who says such things as that?" she demanded. "People here,"